Welcome to this Entura webinar on Global Hydropower Day. Entura is a specialist power and water engineering business advising clients on projects across Australia and the Indo-Pacific as the consulting arm of Hydro Tasmania. My name's Dale Bryce and I'm Entura's Director Hydropower and Headworks and your host for this webinar today, where we'll explore the opportunities and challenges confronting the energy sector. Indeed, we gather here today to discuss the question, can hydropower resolve the energy crisis? Firstly, as we like to do at Entura, I'd like to acknowledge and pay respect to the Australian Aboriginal peoples as the traditional and the original owners and the continuing custodians of the land on which many of us gather today. And I acknowledge their elders, past, present, and emerging. So we turn now to the reason for the event, Global Hydropower Day. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Mr. Roger Gill to launch our event today. Roger is the President of the International Hydropower Association, Chair of the Transmission and Distribution Business Tas Networks. He's a renewable energy consultant and a company director. Roger, thanks for being here today to launch Global Hydropower Day.
Thanks, Dale. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Great. Dear friends, look, I'm really happy that it's Global Hydropower Day. It's a sort of like the important day of the year for anyone involved in hydropower. And I understand this is the first event anywhere in the world on this inaugural day. So I want to thank Entura and the organisers for creating the space for this momentous kickoff. The events and activities of the day will shine a light on the positive impacts of sustainable hydropower for people and communities around the world. We'll see companies, organisations and individuals joining the celebration by sharing case studies and personal stories highlighting how sustainable development of hydropower has improved their lives. Now you can join the social media conversation on Global Hydropower Day using hashtags Global Hydropower Day and with hydropower. And I've already seen stuff scooting around the social Twitter sphere. Look, hydropower, as the world's largest provider of renewable energy, employs more than 2 million people around the world. Yet, in the words of IEA's chief Fatty Birrell, it's the forgotten giant of renewables. Now, I think today is all about waking up the giant. Furthermore, with the current crisis in energy prices that we're seeing around the world with conflict and tension in many parts, it's driving us to think about energy security, and it's driving us to a faster transition to wind and solar. So there's a huge opportunity for sustainable hydropower to fill the hole left by coal. But we need greater awareness of the role the sector can play in the energy transition, both in its own right and to back up wind and solar. As Dale said, I'm the president of the International Hydropower Association, and I represent an organisation that works to promote sustainable hydropower growth around the world. And we do this thanks to the support of members in more than 90 countries, mostly corporations, that collectively represent 1/3 of global hydropower capacity. And we work closely with national and regional hydropower associations, including here in Australia, the Clean Energy Council. I think our work has never been more important. We come together at a critical time in history. Hydropower may be the grandfather of renewables, but never has there been such a need for our industry. We're not only important to fight to prevent climate change, we're also key to mitigating the effects of climate change and ensuring water and energy security. We think hydropower plays an essential role in the global path to net zero. It's a key to the growth of other renewables. Without hydropower, investments in wind and solar will not be enough. We know that transition's moving apace, and wind and solar need the stability and flexibility that long duration storage from hydropower can bring to the grid. I was really pleased yesterday to see the comment from Clean Energy Council's CEO, Kane Thornton, where he described, and I quote, hydropower is having a renaissance where its role in the future energy system is now accepted as critical to complement and support the enormous growth of variable wind and solar, and work alongside batteries and other forms of energy storage. If people are saying that's not the case, then they're mistaken. This is clearly the trend, and people who are making significant grid decisions are now recognising the importance of this. But for hydropower to play that role, given the duration of investment required, we've got to get really going on significant investments urgently. We've already heard from the International Energy Agency, IEA, and from IRENA and other institutions that in the next 30 years, we've got to double the capacity of hydropower across the globe. So given the lead times, which we know, decisions need to be made now if you're going to really get things going in the 2030s and 40s. Our comment to everybody is business as usual will not get the job done. Whilst we've been around for a while, we've also had plenty of time to learn mistakes. And learning from those mistakes is really important. As we go forward, let's make some new ones and avoid making old ones. Now, to help us do that, fortunately, we've got some tools. Almost a year ago, hydro stakeholders all around the world launched the San Jose Declaration on Sustainable Hydropower. This followed lengthy consultations with the sustainable hydropower community, and it's a set of principles, recommendations and commitments from the sector, which will define how we operate in the 21st century. And at its heart, it had two lines. Sustainable hydropower is a clean, green, modern and affordable solution to climate change. And going forward, the only acceptable hydropower is sustainable hydropower. So we know that hydropower won't grow to its full potential unless it's done and is perceived to be done sustainably. We read that in the press all the time. We've got to come out and show people that it can be done sustainably. We know that if it's done right, it does have significant environmental and social benefits for communities. It delivers multiple positive impacts for people and groups across the world. The flexibility in energy storage services are pretty obvious. We all know about them. Affordability is a key component of supporting wind and solar. That's why wind and solar are going so well. And backed up by hydro, we know that's the cheapest form of energy and firm energy going forward. We know that we have to recognise that if you're building large hydro, there's impact on the land around us. And so you have to find ways to measure what we do. And we have set up now the Hydropower Sustainability Standard. Now we're trying to get the message out across the world that this standard is a globally accepted tool that companies can use to transparently certify their hydropower projects. And amongst the renewables, we're the only ones with a globally accepted standard. It aligns with the World Bank, it aligns with IFC. The Climate Bonds Initiative uses it. And so I'm encouraging everyone to get out there and use the standard. Pump storage, the big next green water battery, is also a very important initiative going forward. IHA convened an international forum on pump storage in 2020. We had 13 governments, Malcolm Turnbull hosting, the US Department of Energy involved, really pushing pump storage. And I'm so pleased to see that just this year, we've got the ambitious plan coming out to build the world's largest capacity pump storage hydropower project, announced by Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk. So the proposed Pioneer Burdekin project in North Queensland is going to give us 5 gigawatts of 24-hour storage. This is a really significant development for our industry, and I'm hoping that governments around the world will follow in the footsteps of the Queensland government. Quite sensational decisions, really, to move away from coal and underpin future renewables with pumped hydro. So to summarise, we've got a need. You hear from me how urgent it is, and others are saying it's urgent. What we've got to do is act. I think there are 4 things that we have to do. We've got to mobilise stakeholders at a global and local level. The San Jose Declaration gives a framework for action. Number 2, we've got to demonstrate that it can be done sustainably. We've got to get out there and use the standard and show people we can build sustainably. If we don't do that, the skeptics will always be circling. Number 3, we've got to keep pushing forward. Make sure that our projects follow that good practice. And that's a definite move that we've got to make. And fourthly, we've got to speak up. We've been too long sitting around hoping that people will pick us up. We have got to get out there and say we can, with hydropower, change this world. So, in summary, the bottom line is sustainable hydropower is clean, green, modern, and affordable solution to climate change, and it will ensure the energy transition is done effectively. But it'll only make that strong contribution if we stop thinking about business as usual and turn our minds to developing sustainable hydropower. I thank you for letting me introduce the day. I'm so excited about Global Hydropower, as you can see, and look forward to the balance of the discussions. Thanks, Dale. Back to you.
Thank you, Roger Gill, President of the International Hydropower Association. So to our question today on Global Hydropower Day, can hydropower resolve the energy crisis? We've assembled a panel of experts to help us confront that very question. And while we talk about the issues, the challenges and the opportunities before us today, we'd love you, the audience, to be involved in this webinar. And if you'd like to ask a question of our panel or even provide a comment, please do so via the Q&A function at the top of your screen. Let's set the scene and build on the inspiring words from Roger earlier today. There's a crisis as the economics of energy is being upended due to regional conflicts, fossil fuel pricing, and a faster than expected transition from baseload coal to nuclear power. As Roger indicated there, everything about hydropower is new, but it seems, let me just do that one more time, everything about hydropower is old, but seems to be new again. We're now looking to hydropower where many things can be resolved using it and tapping its potential. But let's talk to some people that know, and let's start with Amanda Ashworth, Director Strategy, Sales and Commercial at Entura. Make sense of all this for us, Amanda. What's going on and why? Amanda, you will be charged $5 because your microphone is off.
Oh, can you believe I'm still doing that in 2022? Sorry, everyone. Yeah, thanks, Dale. I'm not sure that I can provide all the answers, and certainly on the heels of Roger Gill's eloquent introduction there, I think probably what I would draw out is it has been a long time coming. So, and I think we know, as Roger said, really the urgency is upon us with the climate change reality. And if I think back to my university days when I learned about the greenhouse effect, which was already over a century after the experiments, you know, were showing the impact of carbon in the atmosphere. And then another 30 years later, we are now talking about what can we do that really makes a difference as a transition to renewable energy. So these things do take time, but the drivers are clearly upon us, both economic and environmental. And I do think that hydropower has a role to play, somewhat of a checkered history, as Roger's pointed out, but those tools and the sustainability frameworks that are so robust now give us an opportunity to do good projects and to learn from those past lessons. And that's, I suppose, what I would see, that there's a role for it in amongst other technologies. And of course, we need to do that sustainably, because the whole point of addressing climate change and achieving a net zero is in fact making up for past mistakes and shoring up the environmental sustainability going forward. So to do that, we need to therefore have our projects working sustainably and having due diligence of the life cycle and the impact of the production of all the components as well as the projects themselves.
So Amanda, I know that, at Entura you're a key driver of our sustainability screening process, and I imagine, you're a big supporter of the San Jose Declaration, the sustainability standards, and indeed you're sharing those through some of the work that you do through our Entura Clean Energy and Power Institute.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the history of that, as Roger's already alluded to, the genesis of that was at a time where hydropower had definitely been quiet, and there was a recognition of doing projects better and having a sustainability lens to those projects for social, environment, cultural, benefit sharing and the like. And I had a small part in that actually in my early career as hydropower and other hydropower countries and companies were involved in developing those initial guidelines. And today, people should have scrutiny on that. We shouldn't hide from that. I believe that there should be that scrutiny, and we know that there is, and we need to look to do that more effectively. And as you say, when we're working with clients, both in a design or engineering sense or in areas that I work in, capability and training, the sustainability aspect of projects, of all renewable projects, do come to the fore. It's fundamental for successful financing. It's fundamental for the social licence of the communities in which the projects are being built, and also for the success of the industry and its role going forward.
And part of that, Amanda, just rounding out the triple bottom line approach that I know you like to take to screening, is touch on briefly the economics of hydropower. It's playing a real economic role as well as environmental right now.
Well, all energy projects have that, an economic benefit to where they're being built, whether that be for electrification and lifting poverty, encouraging employment and jobs and education, where in a lot of countries people are learning by candlelight and the like, So, and we have a massive transition, a large scale transition to happen globally. And so larger scale projects do have a significant role. And so economically, I'm not an economist, so I won't go into too much depth about economy, but there are definite ways that those things can come together for water security, energy security, food security as well. So hydropower with the storage, water storage and benefit sharing and multi-use projects have added value that can create a greater economic impact more broadly downstream.
Thanks, Amanda. Let's go to Donald Vaughn now, Entura's Principal Consultant, Electrical Primary Systems. Donald, what are the issues that you're seeing across the energy sector today, and how can hydropower help?
Thanks, Dale. So I guess, this goes to the effect of introducing lots of variable renewable energy sources into the grid, and the displacement of the supports that the grid has had in place for almost 100 years, I guess, around large synchronous machines located at key points in the network that have controlled voltage, provided inertia and provided fault level. And then the controls of the power system have become really specialised around how those generators interact with each other and with the network and with customer demand. So as we introduce more and more inverter-based variable renewable energy, we're seeing that that's undermining the ability of the synchronous machines that are left to maintain grid stability. And if we think about grid stability in a sort of more holistic sense, then we're talking about controllability first, which is sort of classical stability, but then we should also think about predictability and variability. Hydro has a role to play in addressing the challenges associated with each of those abilities. So predictability, we know where the hydro is, we know how much storage is there at any given time, and we can call on it in a controlled way. Controllability, generally hydro machines are synchronous machines, and so they bring the inertia, the fault level, the ability to respond to frequency changes, and the dispatchability again. So they've got the controllability aspects nailed. And then in terms of variability, generally they can ramp up and down to mop up the differences in that are being presented by the variable renewable energy sources without huge impacts on efficiency or other knock-on effects that perhaps thermal machines might see in that space. So that's sort of the challenges, and that's where hydro sort of sits in addressing those challenges.
And you mentioned predictability, and I guess the opposite of that is unpredictability. The challenge of baseload energy is a concept that's becoming less and less real now. So where do you see hydropower fitting in, say, a daily cycle of usage?
Yeah, so it's sort of in two, I guess there's 2 or 3 different modes that hydro can work in. So you obviously, in places where there's run of the river schemes, then you can use those as a base load. You can sort of move water down the cascade in a controlled fashion to provide base load. If you've got a storage scheme, obviously it can also provide base load. But ultimately, we're seeing more and more in places with really high renewable penetration that there is no load. And so pumped hydro can provide a way of providing additional demand during times of surplus renewable energy. And so we get, instead of having this large scale renewable energy plants shut down or curtailed, we can mop up that energy and use it at a time that might be more useful.
And we've seen weather events, across the globe where renewable energy, solar and wind as being the dominant forms at this time, haven't been able to perform for whatever reason. Either the sun's not shining, or the wind's not blowing, or a transline's been interrupted. I guess you're seeing a role for that as well for hydropower and other storage.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think that the ability of hydro schemes to store even small amounts of energy for short periods of time can be really valuable under those circumstances. And, there's clearly a niche being exploited at the moment by battery systems where they're going for really short-term energy storage and not terribly deep cycles. But once the volume of renewable energy becomes significantly greater than it is now, we're going to see a need for longer term storages as well. And AEMO in their ISP predict around 20% of all storage will need to be deep storage by 2050 if we're in Australia, if we're to make the full transition from where we are now to where we need to be for net zero at 2050.
Thanks, Donald. We'll come back to you just on that storage piece shortly. Let's go to Entura's Richard Raynan, Principal Consultant Civil. Richard, provide us with a snapshot of the hydropower projects that you've been across lately across the region. What are these projects designed to do?
Thanks, Dale. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to talk about a few projects that I'm currently involved in, both here in Australia as well as one in particular in Malaysia. And these three, there's predominantly three areas. So there's the Kidston Pumped Hydro up in Queensland, which is a 250 megawatt project. There's some projects associated with what they refer to as the Battery of the Nation, which is projects here in Tasmania, which is the Tarraleah redevelopment that I'll talk briefly about, as well as the Sathana Pumped Hydro Energy Storage. And then the international one will be the Balai Hydroelectric Project in Malaysia, which is 1,285 megawatt. Now, what I can clearly say from these, my involvement in these projects is hydropower is definitely playing an important role in the current energy transition. And it's around that flexibility of the hydropower and its ability to be very responsive and its ability to be able to store energy easily. Now, of course, with hydropower, it's the transmission connectivity becomes very important. Without that, we can't bring this flexibility and responsiveness to the market. An example of this, of course, is with the Battery of the Nation. We often talk with the requirement of the Marinus link, which is the transmission connection, the undersea cable between Tasmania and Victoria, and increasing that capacity. And by increasing that capacity, what does that do? That brings to the market more deep storage from our existing system. So we've got some very big storages here already in our system, both Gordon and Great Lake, and that can become the way we operate that in the market can change, and we can become and bring that responsiveness to the market. But we can also increase capacity, and so that's happening with refurbishment of some of our hydropower plant, and we're talking a lot about the refurbishment of the Pyman scheme, which will increase capacity due to increased efficiency. But there's also some old projects. So Tarraleah is one of those, and it's not at this stage, although it's an important project within our system, it's not responsive at the moment. It's got a long canal system, and which takes about 4 hours for water to move from the main storage to the transmission plant. And so we can't then match and respond to the market as needed just by a flick of a switch. So the big part of the Tarraleah redevelopment is to make that project more responsive through a pressurized scheme where we have a tunnel all the way to the storage. And at the same time, we will increase capacity. In addition to that is we look at increasing with our existing scheme, increasing some of the storage and capacity through looking at pumped hydro. And we've done a lot of work around pumped hydro atlases, and we're looking at the best project here in Tasmania for that. And we have identified that as being the Sathana Pumped Hydro Energy Storage, with feasibility studies completed on that. Now, of course, the challenge with a lot of these projects is that there is long lead time. That's common with hydropower, whether it's traditional hydropower or whether it's pumped hydro. For example, the Tarraleah redevelopment, we've only been looking at that in earnest in the last year. But we're doing that work for a project that's not going to be generating until 2028. So that's a long period of development. The project in Malaysia that I want to briefly talk about is 8 years of construction time with the Balai project, just the construction time. And then we talk about Kidston, which we got involved in that in 2015. And that's not meant to be completed until 2024. So you can look at the sort of development times that we're talking about. And as a result, we need to make investment decisions well in advance. And this is one of the challenges of hydropower development. And the uncertainty in the market and the uncertainty about revenue streams doesn't lend itself to make this investment decisions easy. Now, how the example of Kidston, which is the first pumped hydro for 40 years here in Australia, we got involved in that with Genex, and they achieved this certainty with the revenue stream by signing an agreement with Energy Australia to give that revenue certainty for that project. So there is ways of doing it, but you have to look at power purchase agreements associated with that storage nature of those projects. Now, of course, these are drivers here in Australia, but there's also drivers, the same sort of drivers are happening elsewhere in the world. So with the project in Sarawak, which is part of the Sarawak Corridor of Renewable Energy, so the SCORE project, which was all about bringing hydropower into Sarawak to help encourage industry within that area, and it's the industrialisation of the state of Sarawak. And an important part of the Bale project of hydropower development within Sarawak is the corridor. The transmission connection again, which is a 500 kV line connecting both Sarawak but also its neighbours, so that we can transport this this energy, this flexible and responsive energy easily. With Bale, it's also a big deep-seated storage, and one of the challenges that, of course, they've had recently is, of course, with COVID. With that, and hydropower is these days very much an international industry. They depend on international experts like ourselves and engineering, and they depend on construction expertise as well. And so that's been a real challenge with COVID. But that's now improving again and good. So I think those are probably some of the things that I'd like to just bring to the table at this point.
Thanks, Richard. It's certainly an exciting time to be in hydropower, and it's great that you mentioned the Tarraleah upgrade, because there's a project that is old but will be new again in response to the new demands in the market. Let's just turn to Rajiv Raynan now, Entura's resident director and team leader in India. Rajiv, there's similar issues, I understand, in India, on the subcontinent and through Southeast Asia, I understand. What are your observations of developments in, say, India, Nepal, Laos and the Philippines?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. The Indian power sector, has been under considerable stress for last few years. And in fact, this year we had a lot of issues with the stockpiles of coal, which is used for, which is the main power generation that caters to 60-70% of the power generation in India. And in summer of 2022, in fact, we had power minister stating that we had only like 5 or 6 days of stock of coal left for power generation. And further, this has been coupled with the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and this has sent a lot of governments into crisis. And there is a big urgency to shift from dependency on fossil fuels to clean energy sources. And this is where renewable energy, and particularly in hydropower, comes into the picture. But as Donald and Richard said, with solar and wind, there is a lot of variability in the generation due to the climate conditions and all that other factors that come into it. So hydropower is required to complement this wind and solar. And a very good example of hydropower is in April 2020 our Prime Minister encouraged everybody to switch off the lights at 9 p.m. for 9 minutes. And in those 9 minutes, system demand suddenly plunged down by 31 gigawatt hour in all over India. And it's due to the flexibility of the hydropower that it was able to ramp down, and suddenly after 9 minutes, when there was a huge demand, it was able to ramp up. So that's the biggest advantage of hydropower. So but hydro has its issues in Asia. The gestation period is a bit long, and there is technical challenges such as environment, social, geological risk, and it becomes a bit costlier than solar and wind. But having said that, we should concentrate mainly on using hydro as a peak power for grid stabilization instead of competing with the low solar and wind tariffs. And I think government in Asia, South Asia and Southeast Asia have realized these benefits, and they are pushing on big scale. And like Roger said about the pumped hydro, I think it's the need of the hour. And in fact, the Ministry of Power in India has clarified that, energy storage systems shall be integral part of the new electricity bill. So accordingly, I think we can start preparing an atlas for the pumped hydro projects for India, maybe for whole of South Asia, and encourage the participation from private developers so that a lot of, this can be private pumped hydro can be developed. And one more thing that is very important from perspective of Asia and maybe from Europe also, the regional cooperation on energy or cross-border energy trade is, it's very much vital to the energy planning. It's required to be done. If we leave India, India is having a good energy cross-border energy trade with Nepal and Bhutan. If we see with Vietnam also, Vietnam has a very ambitious COP26 commitments. As a part of that, it plans to buy energy from Laos, Cambodia, and China. So I think it's very important to have a very good cross-border trades, and accordingly, the developments in the country where there is a demand, they can dictate how the power projects are developed in the other countries. So this is from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajiv. That's really interesting to hear that there's similar issues across your region, and really exciting to understand too that you and your team in India are now mapping the Indian subcontinent for its pump storage potential, not just in terms of the topography where there might be hills, but in terms of the engineering insights that I know that you and your team will be able to bring to that project. Let me get back to Donald Vaughan here. So maybe a simple question, Donald, but there's a lot of talk about storage, but is the key question battery energy storage or hydropower?
I don't think it is the key question. I think that there's space for both. In fact, there's vast plains available for both. Like ultimately, if we're going to have, and it really depends on the mix within each country as to how much solar, how much wind, how much controllability of those things. But ultimately, we're going to need a lot of storage to move the glut of solar that we're going to have in the middle of the day to the rest of the time when we don't have access to solar energy. So I think there's plenty of space within the storage requirements for both hydro and batteries, and in particular, as we discussed before, the deeper storage capacity that is natural to hydro at the scale that hydro is at has a really important role to play. I think I'd like to pick up on a couple of ideas that Richard and Rajiv raised as well around the gestation period for hydro and the clarity or the certainty around investment decisions. And one of the things that the IEA have found in that space is that, where hydro has a role to play, it's not always clear exactly how to make that role economically viable. And so there needs to be work done to understand ahead of time how that investment is going to be promoted or undertaken. So we've seen, obviously, in Queensland, the government have said, well, we can't leave this up to the market. We need to make an intervention. We're going to do these very large projects that they've announced over the last couple of weeks. And I guess similar in Tasmania with our Battery of the Nation, not quite at the scale, but maybe at the relative scale between Tasmania and Queensland. The IEA found that you know, in each jurisdiction, depending on the market arrangements in those jurisdictions, there might be a slightly different mechanism required to pay for or to incentivise hydro, but that it's really important that the hydro investment is still made.
And I imagine, Donald, it's you know, in some countries where there isn't a market, then there needs to be some sort of mechanism where sustainable hydropower can be built and operated to support that economy somehow.
Yeah, that's right. Because otherwise, you're just continually chasing after the next, you know, available megawatt of demand, but quickly, you know, a new gas turbine can come and fill that need, but that's undermining the ability of that country to back out of carbon, essentially.
Not to mention the price of gas at this time.
Well, yes, there's all those sorts of concerns as well.
Exactly. Let's get back to Richard Hawaiian, and I want to go to some of our questions that were provided by our audience from across the globe. It's exciting to hear from many people. A great question to kick us off from Mark Locke from GHD. And Richard, you know, on our technical review panel for the Battery of the Nation, and Mark asks, Tasmania is aiming for long duration pumped hydro energy storage, while other states in Australia are targeting shorter durations, mostly diurnal storage. Do you think long duration is specific to Tasmania or applicable elsewhere?
So it's a good question. I think that there is something to say it is specifically Tasmanian, but that's mainly because I think it's our competitive advantage within the market that we can provide this deeper storage, which is needed. A lot of the modelling that's been undertaken, there is periods of time where you get more than 1 day of no wind. And of course, we know that solar doesn't happen when it's nighttime. So there is periods of time where there is gaps in the market and we need to have longer duration storage. It's not that frequent, but it is there. Just because it's not frequent, as Donald says, doesn't mean we don't need it, but it's how it's rewarded within the market because we need that. So I suppose in summary, here in Tasmania, we see we can offer this and very deep storage. That's not just with the things like the Tarraleah redevelopment and the Sathana. It's our existing scheme that's got already deep storage present.
And talking to energy traders, they basically don't get out of bed for any storage that's not longer than 4 to 5 hours. That must be longer than 4 to 5 hours for them to even consider it. So it's very interesting when you start talking to the traders in markets. Perhaps Donald, if I could just return to you. You know, we have a great question here from Pedro Perry from Grupo Energia in Brazil. How can foreign engineering companies really get involved in this type of work in hydropower?
Well, I think, you know, based on Roger's introductory remarks, there's a lot of hydropower to build. So we really need as many people across the globe being involved in this and sort of sharing expertise where possible to try and grow the pie, because you know, we've sort of sat on our hands in terms of renewable energy over the last 10 years in Australia, you know, maybe longer really, in terms of Amanda's experience with the greenhouse effect and knowing about that. We've got work to do to catch up to 2030 and 2050 targets, and you know, it's going to need a lot of hydropower expertise, a lot of transmission expertise, and a lot of other pieces of the puzzle in terms of investments and all that stuff. So yeah, there's plenty of scope for everybody who has that expertise now to get involved, I would have thought.
And Amanda, I know that you're passionate about capability building especially across our region in the Indo-Pacific. Interested in your comments about capability building in the lead up to this, to new projects and existing projects. That pipeline's getting quite big and quite long now.
Yeah, Dale, capability is obviously a massive thing, and most countries in the world, I think, are already focused on STEM in schools and lifting engineering capability and interest, including for women, and increasing the pie that way, increasing the pool. So yeah, I think it's a global trend that we are short on capacity and capability in this area. So it all starts. That's also a long journey. Building interest, building education systems that deliver industry-ready graduates at the end of the day. And I know a number of countries and organisations we talk to from a training perspective are conscious of that and trying to work with universities as well to bring that capability, that engineering capability. I think the original question we had asked was possibly around construction. I'm not sure, but either way, I think there has to be, I guess, a realisation there's broader things at play from a international perspective of how in any one country those things are resourced, including from international input. So the same goes for Australia. We have a number of companies and construction companies that have international heritage or international ownership, and they're involved in the projects here. And so the frameworks within any one country that allow and facilitate that participation and how they make the most of the opportunity to bring additional skills and capability into the mix without the barriers to that. I think that's kind of the question, but of course that's very muddied across multiple countries around the world on the foreign investment, migration, visas, all sorts of things that have to come to play. But echoing what Donald and Roger have said, it's a big task, and the net zero aims for 2050 we're seeing hydropower have a steady growth in that in that forward look, but we're not even at the level of that modelling predicts. So yes, there needs to be decisions made, as Roger has said, but the fast tracking can't come at the expense of sustainability and those social and local impact considerations. So getting that balance right is also part of the story.
Thanks, Amanda. Let's go to our final question from Ian Hubbard at Tas Networks. I'm going to open this one up to the panel. Does water always flow downhill?
Oh
yeah. Well, it sort of does unless you push it back uphill, doesn't it?
So yes, naturally
Richard?
it does. Naturally it does, but with human intervention we can bring it to the top, and that's the whole concept of pumped hydro, where we bring that energy and put that energy back into storage with potential energy up on a hill somewhere, and we can use it when we need it later on. But the important thing to recognise is it does take more energy to put it up there than we get out of it. So there is this round trip efficiency. You will lose some energy. So there has to be a reason for doing it.
So Richard, does that mean it only works where there's a market and you can get a different price for it at a different time?
Well, I think it is part of the market where you have this supply and demand, and there will be then a cheaper time when there's oversupply, and a high time where the demand becomes a high price. When
so
the
it could be a
demand
demand thing rather than the market. Yeah.
So look, thank you to the panel, and especially thank you indeed to Roger Gill for launching Global Hydropower Day here with us on this webinar, as we've been confronting that question, can hydropower resolve the energy crisis? It seems the energy transition is fast moving. It certainly is across Australia and the Indo-Pacific, as we see the rise of cheap renewable power complemented by energy storage, with hydropower providing deep storage options for when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. In the end, as I think Roger was hinting, it seems that all of this is going to be required as we all confront the energy trilemma of energy security, affordability and environmental sustainability. We hope you've got a few tips from our team today. It's been a real pleasure holding the first event of Global Hydropower Day. And so from us here at Entura, thanks for joining us on Global Hydropower Day.